Week 101. Japan is getting hungry. Barbarossa is confused. World War II, August 1st, 1941.
Yeah, we're pulling back. Yeah, just pulling back. But we're leaving you behind. Your whole crew. Yeah,
Oh,
all of them.
kind of fucked up.
What should you do? Well, don't get captured. Hey, yeah, don't get captured. And just smash stuff. Just destroy stuff. Just break all the stuff you can. Yeah, and don't get captured. Yeah, all right, cool. All right, good luck. August 1st, 1941. Japan has taken and continues to take aggressive measures to secure new resources to continue its war in China. And this week, that brings conflict between them and the Western powers. So what do those Western powers do? They cut them off.
Yay.
I'm Indy Nidell. This is World War II.
I'm Ryan.
Last week, Adolf Hitler issued a directive diverting his panzer groups from Moscow to Leningrad and Kiev, while in his rear the supply and transport situation had grown dire. The Soviets, though, began to receive supplies from the Allies and launched an offensive of their own. And far to the east, the Japanese demanded bases in Indochina from the Vichy French, which telegraphs that they will be focusing their efforts to the south and the east. This week, the Japanese occupation of southern Indochina begins. The Vichy French will continue to administer Vietnam. The 29th, the Japanese occupy Camaran Naval Base, 1,200 kilometers from Manila, and the British base at Singapore. The Japanese have sent 125,000 troops into Indochina in the past week.
Damn.
The Vichy French said they would allow 40,000, but it's not like they have any way.
So a bit more than 40,000. Hold on, quick math. 3 times as many.
Of enforcing such a limit. On the 1st, the Japanese occupy Saigon. The United States reacts to this by freezing Japanese assets on the 26th. 2 days later, the Japanese do the same in return. That same day, Japanese assets in the Dutch East Indies are frozen and oil deals are...
Something tells me that the Americans freezing Japanese assets is a bit more impactful than the Japanese freezing American assets.
...canceled. The Japanese do the same to the Dutch,
at least
but what all
at
this
this point in
means
history.
is that 75% of Japan's foreign trade is now stopped, and 90% of its oil supplies are now cut off. The Panama Canal is also closed to Japanese shipping. On the 30th, the American gunboat Tutuila is damaged by Japanese bombers in Chongqing. The Japanese apologize, but this does not help the strained relations between the two. On August 1st, at the end of the week, American President Franklin Roosevelt bans the sale of oil and aviation fuel abroad by the United States, except to Britain and the Commonwealth or nations of the Western Hemisphere. Japan does not produce its own oil and has only limited stocks. The position is such that Japan must either change her foreign policy very radically or decide very quickly to go to war to gain access to the oil of the East Indies. FDR also does
something tells me I know that they're going to choose the war option.
Something else in case the Japanese go ahead with their seeming current plans. And he does it in the Philippines. See, the Tidings-McDuffie Act calls for Philippine independence from the U.S. in 1944 and the withdrawal of the last American forces in 1946, right? Former U.S. Army Chief of Staff Douglas MacArthur had gone to the Philippines to help them build up their defenses for independence. But now he is recalled to active duty, and the War Department begins to build up his forces there as a deterrent to Japanese attack. To strengthen the islands to such an extent as to make a Japanese attack on them appear too risky, and a Japanese move south which avoided them is also too dangerous in the eyes of policymakers in Japan. So there might soon be action in the seas there, but lately there's been a lot of action in another sea, in the Battle of the Atlantic. Though in July, Allied shipping losses were not nearly as bad as they've been recently, U-boats sink 22 ships for 94,200 tons out of a total of 121,000 tons of shipping lost, compared with over 90 ships sunk in May. Thing is, the U-boat fleet is growing. There are now 63 active ones and 93 in training. 20 new ones are commissioned in July, and only 1 active one is lost.
Damn.
On the Allied side, the strength of the British escort forces is also increasing. And last week, Allied shipping began sending supplies to the Soviets by the northern route. As for actual fighting between the Soviets and the Axis away from that supply route, in the north, the German 8th Panzer Division had been forced a couple weeks ago to fight against being encircled after being separated from the 3rd Motorized Division on its left by the Soviet Luga Operational Group's 177th Rifle Division and the 10th Mechanized Corps under the new Northwestern Front Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Nikolai Vatutin. German plans in general were disrupted by this, since Erich Hübner had to divert troops to rescue the 8th at Solzhenitsyn. But since the 8th does survive, the 1st Army Corps captures Shimsk now on the 30th, and Ernst Busch's 16th Army is also advancing and reaches the south side of Lake Ilmen as the week ends. On the other side of Leningrad, Finnish attacks towards Viipuri and Vuosalmi begin. As for Army Group Center, the Smolensk pocket is closed the 27th, with a drive from Hermann Holt's Panzer Group 3 from the north. But there are still a great many men inside who will fight to break out. Heavy Soviet attacks are falling at Yelnya and Roslavl, and the 26th Panzer Group 2 calls the situation at Yelnya critical. That day, its commander, Heinz Guderian, is ordered to get his tanks off of the Moscow road and instead attack the Soviet 5th Army near the Pripyat marshes. This according to Hitler's recent directive. Guderian is livid, of course. His divisions are, to be sure, pretty reduced in strength by now, though. David Stahel says that on the 28th, he has just 286 of the 953 tanks he had June 22nd. But on the other hand,
not good.
His leading units have gone 2/3 of the way from the border to Moscow in 6 weeks. They are now just 350 kilometers away. If the weather stays dry over the next couple months, there's no reason to think they couldn't make it there. They would not have any infantry support, of course. They're plodding along in the rear, but still. But also, Guderian is promoted to army commander, so he's once again independent of Gunther von Kluge, who's running all that infantry, but still answerable to Fedor von Bock, who commands the whole army group. Bock shares Guderian's views about continuing on to Moscow, so Guderian launches a delaying tactic to prevent having to turn south, and his forces get involved in the battle for Roslavl, just over 100 kilometers east of Smolensk, which is where the Kiev, Moscow, and Leningrad roads meet. His purpose was to entangle...
Oh, that's a pretty important, I guess, junction. What the fuck? Stop it. Fucking hell.
Tangle his forces so deeply with the Russian defenders that the justification for their diversion to assist Rundstedt would be overtaken by events and so allow him to proceed towards Moscow as originally ordered. This actually nearly worked because Soviet commander Semyon Timoshenko had sent in reserves in that sector, but Hitler soon has second thoughts. On the 30th, he issues Directive 34 and arranges to visit Army Group Center August 4th to see firsthand how things really are. This directive's intro says that Guderian...
Jesus Christ, just villain right there. Look at him.
And Hot's panzers need 10 days to rehabilitate themselves, so their tasks of the previous directive, diversions to the north and south, are postponed. Army Group Center will go on the defensive while the tanks are getting back into shape. Army Group South will fight without reinforcements from Army Group Center for the time being. They are to destroy the enemy forces west of the Dnieper, and by taking the bridgehead south of Kiev, set the stage for bringing the 1st Armored Group to the east banks of the river. The Soviet 5th Army must be destroyed west of the Dnieper, and any chance that it can break through to the north, across the Pripyat River, must be eliminated. Adolf Hitler is directing this whole operation differently from earlier ones. His confidence in himself as a military commander is a lot bigger by now. He had left the conduct of the Polish campaign to his generals, and had largely been talked into the Scandinavian invasions by Admiral Raeder. Before and during the campaign in the West, he had given his generals orders, but had also suffered from severe attacks of indecision and second thoughts, notably outside Dunkirk. Since the inception of Barbarossa, however, he had found an increasing certitude. It was in the fullest sense his war. It had started triumphantly, and as its course developed, he grew overbearing in its direction. And here, is another long quote, one from David Glantz, about what the new plans mean. In effect, Hitler's decisions meant that, because of the growing Soviet resistance on the Moscow axis, henceforth the Wehrmacht would make its main effort against Leningrad in the north and Kiev and Ukraine in the south. The reality was that the momentum of the Blitzkrieg was slipping away, not only because of the hesitation of the German high command, but also because of the stubborn resistance of Soviet troops. Red Army Chief of Staff Georgy Zhukov feels that German Army Group Center is not the offensive force it was weeks ago because of all the Smolensk fighting. And he tells Stavka the 29th he does not think they'll resume the drive on Moscow until after eliminating the threat to its flank from the Red Army center front to its southwest. He recommends that the center front be reinforced so it can protect the northern flank of Mikhail Kirponov's southwest front, and that Kirponos abandon Kiev and withdraw beyond the Dnieper. Joseph Stalin objects to this, not appreciating the threat to Kiev, and in fact replaces Zhukov as chief of staff with Boris Shaposhnikov and assigns Zhukov to command the reserve front. Shaposhnikov, for his part, does appreciate the threat to Kiev and also tries to convince Stalin of the necessity of withdrawing. But Stalin does not listen, convinced the attacks will continue towards Moscow. Events are moving quickly in Ukraine by now as the German offensive is renewed. Stavka, though, orders the Red Army southwest and southern fronts the 28th to start a joint operation to prevent the Germans from reaching the Dnieper. But by this week in the south, Muzhichenko's 6th Army and Ponedelin's 12th are nearly surrounded and they are in trouble. At the beginning of the week, they have a total of 24 divisions and 1 airborne and 2 anti-tank brigades. So they have about 130,000 of the 180,000-ish men they had on June 22nd. But these men are not only exhausted, they're running out of ammunition and gasoline. So, considering the Germans' total air superiority, they are not a match for the 13 divisions and 200 tanks of Ewald von Kleist's that opposed them. And their condition is dire. Now, there is a 100-kilometer gap between them and Andrew Smirnov's 18th Army to the southeast, and this could have been an escape route. But Semyon Budeny, in command of the theater, and the Stavka, who misunderstand the situation, ordered them to break out to the east, though they do not have that capability any longer. See, Stavka thinks that the Germans plan to push aside the 6th and 12th and then capture crossings of the Dnieper between Kiev and Cherkasy and then advance into the Donbass. This is not Kleist's plan, however. He plans to destroy the enemy. And today, on August 1st, Muzhichenko and Ponedelin radio the Stavka. The situation has become critical. The encirclement of the 6th and 12th armies is complete. The direct threat of the breakup of the 6th and 12th Army's combat formation into 2 isolated segments centered at Babanka and Teklievka regions is at hand. There are no reserves. There is no ammunition. Fuel is running out. They may be worried about their own skins and not just about losing. On the 27th comes an order sentencing 9 senior Red Army officers to death for military incompetence. This order is read out to all officers and men. Among those executed are Generals Pavlov, Korobkov, and Klimovskih. On the 28th, the Soviets in Vyazma issue assignment number 1, which creates a partisan unit of 350 men who are to be left behind when the Red Army retreats. Their tasks will be to destroy German food, fuel, and supply dumps, to destroy the Smolensk, Vyazma, and Vyazma-Bryansk railway lines, and to derail trains, to prevent the use of the Vyazma airport by the Germans by destroying planes and fuel, to kill higher and lower-level German war staffs, to capture high German officers, to hand over to the Red Army any documents containing
How the fuck do you expect 300 people to do that? What?
valuable information about the enemy, and to set up 2 or 3 diversion groups to perform
It's 350 men, dude. That's a lot of... No.
special tasks.
No. No.
That is a big assignment, but these
For
are
300
desperate
men.
times. German General von Faldau claims that by July 30th, the Germans have taken 799,910 prisoners of war and
God
captured or
damn.
destroyed 12,025 tanks. And here are a couple of notes to end the week. On the 31st, Axis forces in North Africa are reorganized. General Ludwig Cruvel now commands the Africa Corps. Erwin Rommel is in charge of what is now Panzer Group Africa. The 5th Light Division is renamed the 21st Panzer Division. Rommel has 2 Panzer Divisions, 1 German Infantry Division, and 7 Italian ones. And that same day, the Ecuadorian-Peruvian War ends, which is not part of this war.
Oh, that lasted a week?
So,
2
that
weeks?
is this week. With the Japanese taking bold new aggressive measures that concern the Americans and the Dutch, Hitler taking more and more control of the war in the East, and changing his orders seemingly every week, and the Germans continuing to have success in the field, in the North, and in the South. Martin Gilbert writes that on July 31st in Kishinev, what is today Chisinau, the capital of Moldova, the first 5-figure civilian massacre of the war comes to its end.
5.
In 2 weeks, over 10,000 Jews have been murdered. This is just a small portion, though, of the Jews already murdered across Moldova and in the rest of the occupied territory. Also that day, on orders from Hitler, Hermann Goering orders SS General Reinhard Heydrich to,
Again, 2 more people that just look like villains. Like, look at just those faces.
as soon as possible, submit a complete proposal for the organizational, operational, and material plan for the endeavored final solution of the Jewish question. We explain the context of Goering's order in our War Against Humanity series. Now, these episodes are now coming out every second week. You can watch the most recent one right here.
And that was week 101. It's just so many just things moving, but like nothing to really talk about in them. It's just the boys are fighting. Boys are fighting and killing each other. That's that. So yeah. Woohoo.